Hey, Ricardo's here.
Hello.
Hey, Ricardo. What's your avatar supposed to be?
It's
watches.
it's what's it called? There's a lot of Hispanics that like trucks, and supposedly the guy is the king of them, of the leader of them.
Is it like from one of the Fast and Furious movies or anywhere in particular?
His name is Victor.
Can you
I
repeat
was
that?
going to ask if it was like from one of the Fast and Furious movies or a video game or something like that.
No, it's
It's
Okay.
Like a group of Mexicans called watches, and they like trucks.
Okay. Looks like Maisha's here. I'm going to wait about 2 or 3 minutes, and if nobody else shows up, we'll get started.
Okay.
All right, sounds good. Vanessa's here. Trevor, holy, I got 4 people here today. This is nice. Wait about a minute or two and I'll get started. All right, guys, I'll just go ahead and get started, and if anybody else shows up, we'll go ahead and add them. Have any of you guys, I know we've had spring break and all that. How was it for you all?
Boring.
Boring. Yeah, the first day or so was kind of nice, but it like the last couple of days it was pretty boring. So my question next was going to be, have any of you guys gone over like the notes like before spring break started, or maybe the last couple of days since you all seem to have been bored, or no?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, since nobody else seems to be saying anything, I think what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go over the 4 days worth of notes that we have. They started last Tuesday with that warm up assignment that was assigned, and they run up through today's warm up assignment. And we'll pick back up like that each Monday, like we had been doing up until we get done with Unit 7. I think we got about 2 weeks left of material before we wrap up with notes. So we'll go from there. So I kind of got them done by days, and I'll take a little break at the end of each day. If any of you guys need me to stop for questions or anything, that's fine. Just let me know. The first day that I've got, go over the first 2 years of the Civil War. Let me try to pull some things up real quick and show them to y'all. Let's see. All right. Well, the first big battle of the war was at Bull Run, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. The Union was supposed to beat the Confederates there. Both the Union and the Confederates had this idea that the other side was not really wanting to fight. They were all talking no action. So both the North and the South thought that if you just have one big battle, beat the snout out of them really hard, then the other side is going to say, "Oh man, we ain't ready for this," and they would give up. Both the North thought this and the South thought this. And so when they met up at Bull Run in the summer of '61, it surprised the North that the South put up as much of a fight as they did. And the South was actually able to come back and win Bull Run, even though they were losing at first. And the big hero of that battle for the South was a guy by the name of Stonewall Jackson, and that was his nickname. As all the other Southerners were running away, and then one of the guys looked up on a hill and said, "Hey, there's Jackson like a stone wall. Let's stop and help out the Virginians," because Jackson was from Virginia. And they rallied and they won. What it kind of bummed out the North, because the North started to realize that the war was not going to end quickly. Lincoln originally asked for 75,000 troops for 3 months. Now he's asking for 500,000 for 3 years. And so that kind of grabs a lot of people's attention. While this is going on, you have General Grant, which I'm going to show you real quick. I can find him. I just missed him. That's okay. And that kind of works. So I'm going to show you this real quick. And I'll be bouncing back and forth with the presentation, so just bear with me. You guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay. That's General Grant. He is going to be one of the big heroes of the war for the North. Have any of you guys ever seen this face before? Question mark?
No.
Okay. Any of you guys ever seen a $50 bill?
Yeah.
He is on the $50 bill. And so he's going to become a big guy in American history, and he's going to be one of the main features, characters, whatever you want to call him, in Unit 6. And he's a little bit in Unit 7 as well. So Grant fights a big battle in Shiloh, which is in, I think, southwestern Tennessee. And this battle lasts for a couple of days. It's very bloody. There's about 30,000 troops that are either wounded or killed at Shiloh. It's the bloodiest battle ever in American history up to that time. A lot of people wanted Grant fired for that, but Lincoln said, "I can't spare Grant." In other words, I can't fire Grant because Grant fights. In other words, Grant does what is necessary to win. On the other hand, you have this other guy by the name of General McClellan, which I'll show you him real quick. Yeah, there he goes. Y'all see him?
Yeah.
Okay. You see where he's got his hand at?
Behind his back.
Inside his pocket.
Yeah, he's got it inside his chest. There's like, I guess there's a pocket in there. I don't really know. But that is a tradition started by Napoleon we talked about for a little bit back in Unit 3. Napoleon always had that pose whenever he was posing, for artwork or whatever, because they didn't have cameras back in Napoleon's time. McClellan thought of himself as a general as good as Napoleon. He went to West Point Academy, which is where all the Army officers get trained usually. He graduated, I think, second in his class. They said he was one of the smartest, book smart students they ever had. So he knew about how to map out a battle plan, get supplies into his army and all that. And McClellan, said the smart way to attack the South is not a head-on fight, but by going around them from the back, which I'm going to show you that plan in just a minute. Get that up. There we go. Is this presenting to you guys still?
Yeah.
Okay. You guys see how the arrows go down the river one way and then up the other way?
Yeah.
Okay. That was the peninsula plan, because that last arrow at the bottom is on a peninsula that leads up to Richmond. And McClellan thought it would be a lot smarter to go that way, because if you see the little red boxes, those stand for Confederate troops. And you see most of them are away from Richmond to the north. So McClellan thought, if I come back around that way, they won't expect it. We can catch them off guard and win the war like that, because Richmond is the capital of the Confederacy. All right. The problem was McClellan took way too long to move, and the slower you move, the more people are going to find out about you coming that way. And then what are the Confederate soldiers going to do at that point, guys?
They counterattack.
Yeah, they'll move their troops down to counterattack you. That's right. And so McClellan lost at this Peninsula campaign. Lincoln fires him, and the guy who stopped McClellan was Robert E. Lee, which we went over last Monday for those who were here. I don't think there were a lot of you here, but Robert E. Lee is one of the other big names of Unit 6. And Lee does not like to fight defense. Lee prefers to fight on offense. And so Lee goes from here and he swoops up this way and invades the north. You see, there's Baltimore there. Baltimore's part of Maryland, and Maryland has stayed with the north. And so Lee has now decided to invade the north. All right. Lee has to be stopped. Lee wants to do this because he's trying to get Maryland to switch sides. He's also trying to get the British or the French to help the Confederates because, people like a winner. And he's also trying to get enough American people to convince Lincoln to quit the war. If any of those happens, Lee has done his job. So Lincoln kind of panics. He rehires McClellan. McClellan catches up with him by accident, and they have a big throwdown at Antietam in Maryland. It's a one-day battle, but it is the single bloodiest day of combat in American history. There was somewhere like, I think 50,000 but if you add them all together on both sides, either killed or wounded in this battle. McClellan is able to stop Lee from moving north. Lee has to turn around and head back. So in that sense, McClellan wins the battle, but McClellan doesn't chase Lee. And the map doesn't show it very well here, but you have this river, it snakes up all the way here, and it's pretty big. And so Lee, it takes him a couple of days to cross this river and go back into Virginia. In the meantime, Lee's army is trapped. if McClellan chased him, he could have trapped him on that river and destroyed his army, and then the war could have been over. Since McClellan doesn't chase, McClellan gets fired a second time, but Lincoln uses this instance to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, and what this does is it says anyone who is a slave in the Confederate States, since we're at war with the Confederate States, they are no longer slaves under the law, which means they're free. Now, of course, my question to you guys, and this is probably the most complicated part of the whole set of notes today. My question to you is, these slaves that have been freed in the Confederacy, are the Confederates going to learn about this and say, oh, snap, they're free. All right, guys, y'all are free to go?
No.
No. So why would it still matter that Lincoln would make this? Hey, Matthew's here. Any guesses? What's going to happen when slaves hear about this, through word of mouth?
Riots.
That could be one thing. What's another thing they could do?
The slaveholders might say, hey, if you fight for the war for the South, you might be free someday.
That's good. That's very good. In fact, the last month of the war in 1865, the Confederates were so desperate, that's exactly what they did. And very few people know about that. So that's good that you brought that up. But they didn't want to free the slaves. So until the very, very end, they didn't go that way. And they tried to keep it a secret, but you can't keep something like that secret for a very long time. So instead, what a lot of these slaves are going to do is they're going to hear about it and they're going to escape. They're going to try to go to the north. Because now they know if they can get to the north, they'll be what?
Free.
Right. And they'll be free forever. Even when the war is over, they'll still be free. And so now that they're free, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take away from the South the way that they make cotton. Because cotton is the way that the South makes its what?
Money.
Correct. And if the South can't make money, they can't buy weapons. And if they can't buy weapons, the war is not going to last very long. The other thing that Lincoln is, go ahead.
Are they still doing those slave hunters? If they still go in the north by this time, or they stopped doing that?
When the war started, they couldn't do that anymore because we were at war with the South. So if you could escape to the north during the Civil War, you would be free. The other thing Lincoln's trying to do is Lincoln is encouraging these runaway slaves to join the Union Army. I mean, that would be pretty powerful, as a runaway slave to say, hey, if I'm allowed to join the army, they're going to train me, they're going to give me guns, they're going to give me money to go back down there and get revenge on the people that did this. I mean, that's pretty powerful stuff. And it worked really well. There was, I think, 180,000 African Americans who joined the Union Army. And Lincoln believes that the North would have lost the war if it wasn't for African Americans fighting for the North. The other big thing is that now the war is no longer about saving the Union. It's also about freeing the slaves. And the South gets more desperate. They're going to fight harder because they know they're going to lose, slavery and that whole way of making money and all that. And the Europeans don't want to help the South out because the Europeans have already banned slavery. I think us, Cuba, and Brazil were the last places left that still had slaves going. So the Europeans don't want to mix up with that. It makes them look bad. Questions about anything so far?
No.
All right. The war not only affects soldiers, it also affects civilians, people, ordinary people like us. It hurts the Confederates a lot more than it hurts the North. The Confederates, remember, have problems getting basic supplies. They don't have a lot of farms growing food. They have a lot more farms growing cotton. They need to import supplies, but they can't because the North is blocking them with the Anaconda Plan. All those ships going around the South. So, you got a British ship coming in. Oh, they can't get through. Union ships stop them. So you have this problem where Richmond runs out of bread. Does any of you guys remember why Richmond is a big deal for the South?
Isn't it a capital for the state?
It's not just a capital for the state of Virginia. It's the capital of the entire Confederacy. And so if you have the capital of the South run out of bread, run out of food, that tells you the whole country's in trouble. And so in the spring of '63, you had the women of Richmond riot, tear up stores looking for bread or looking for things they could steal, sell, and use the money to buy bread somewhere else. It gets so bad, they overwhelm the police. Jefferson Davis shows up. Do any of you guys remember who Jefferson Davis was?
No.
He was the president of the Confederacy. So he shows up. He says, hey, I don't know what else to do. I know times are tough. And so he actually has a chest, like a big old school chest, like a treasure chest full of paper money. And he throws it out to the women and says, here, see if this will buy you some bread. And that didn't work either. And so Davis told the women, y'all better get out of here because there are some soldiers showing up and they're going to shoot you if you don't leave. So that kind of shows you how bad it is in the South. The North doesn't have problems like that, but the North does have the problem of trying to get people into the Army. Remember that the Lincoln wanted 500,000 soldiers. He wants them to fight for 3 years. You heard me say how bloody some of these battles were. After a couple of those, is it going to be easy or difficult to recruit soldiers to join the Army?
It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, very difficult. So what had to happen was they had to make a new law to draft people. This was called the Conscription Act. It said basically, hey, we're going to put your name in a hat and we're going to draw a certain number of names out for every county, every town, every state. And if your name gets pulled out, then you got to go. All right. And the biggest riot over that, because there were riots, were in New York City. New York City, basically, you have all these immigrants who have been coming in from Unit 5. You got all the Irish immigrants who are there. You got a lot of German immigrants who are there. And they don't have a lot of money. And they see the war as being a rich man's war. Guys like Lincoln who, quote, started it, even though he didn't start it. But, you have that perception. Oh, the rich guys want to fight the other rich guys. But they don't have to fight. We're the ones who have to fight. And something that kind of made them say that was the fact that in this particular war, if you paid the draft man $300, you didn't have to fight. Now, $300 back then is worth thousands and thousands of dollars in today's money. Most people don't have $300 back in the day to give the draft man. So they're like, you know, oh, you see, I told you that was true. They were trying to get the poor people to fight the rich man's war. All right. So you have it like that. Also, African Americans were not drafted because African Americans were not citizens of the United States at that time. So you couldn't force them to fight for a country they weren't citizens of. And so the Irish are like, oh, this is for rich people trying to free slaves who are coming up to the north, taking our jobs away from us. And so this anger built up and built up and built up. And in the summer of '63, almost the same time the Richmond riot goes on, you have thousands of people in New York, tear up draft offices, attack anybody who's working for the draft, attack and burn houses of the wealthy. They even burned down a little orphanage in New York that had, I think it was like 100 or 200 African American kids living there. They didn't kill any of the kids, but they burned the orphanage to the ground because they were helping African American people. It was really bad, and these riots went on for 4 whole days until the Union Army showed up and killed a bunch of them, and got everything kind of under control. Trying to think. Any questions about anything at this point?
No.
All right. Another thing I was going to go over, another day's worth of notes, was supposed to be about the way the war affected soldiers, but it did not necessarily deal with combat. The South, remember, they don't have a lot of anything. So the South, the soldiers, they don't have a reliable way of getting fed, which means whenever they would march, because that's how people moved around, they would march by foot, and their shoes would wear out, and the government didn't have money to buy them shoes and send them shoes. So a lot of your soldiers were actually marching around barefoot. A lot of the uniforms were homemade. So like when you see a Union soldier, they're all wearing these nice blue suits. Confederate soldiers are usually gray, but it could be a dark gray versus a light gray. You might have holes in the uniforms that get patched with beige or brown or something that you can just find and patch as you go, because the uniforms don't get replaced. They would often walk by a farm, or march by a farm, I should say. They would steal all of the livestock, the cows, the pigs, the chickens, slaughter them and camp that night and have the meat right there, because nobody is going to send them any food. So the South has all those problems. The North, they have it a little bit better. They get blankets, they get boots, they get uniforms. Their food isn't very good. They get this thing called hardtack, which looks like a giant cracker. It's like this thick. You can see that. I mean, like a regular cracker is like half as thick as my finger. Hardtack's like that thick. And it's hard as a rock. So if you try to bite it, you'll crack your teeth on it. So you have to dunk it in water or pour water on it. I mean, that's kind of nasty. And then they would like have tinned cans, which were invented not too long before the war, that would have like canned meat or canned peaches or things like that. So the North has it a bit better. Both sides have sorry medical conditions. They don't understand how germs spread yet. So a lot of times you have these battles where like 20,000 people have been shot. They're trying to save people. And the best way they knew how was by cutting arms and legs off. They didn't have rods and pins back then like they do today. You have these bullets, would hit an arm bone and the bone would shatter like glass. And if it hits here, the doctors don't really know what to do except saw it off at the elbow, try to stitch up the veins and arteries before you bleed to death, and just leave you to rest up. But the problem is there's so many of them, as soon as they take your arm, throw it in a pile, stitch you up, and send you back, you got lines of people who are waiting next, and they take the same saw that's full of blood, and they'll go on the next one. And so you have all these germs spreading around. They're all packed tight together, no social distancing because they don't know what that is, and no sterilization because they don't know what that is. And so you have all these people dying in all these hospitals. You actually have more people die in the hospitals than actually die on the battlefield, because you don't really have professional soldiers yet. You have people who were called up. They weren't like hunters or soldiers their whole lives, so they're just like in these lines just shooting at people. And so you don't have a lot of them hitting the chest or hitting the head where they die boom right there on the spot. You got some, but most of them, they're getting hit in the shoulder, in the leg, down by their ankle, and so they survive the bullet hit, but they die in these hospitals. One of the people who made it better were nurses. Nurses didn't understand why they were doing what they were doing, except it was nasty in these hospitals. So they cleaned up the hospitals. They cleaned the instruments. They took anything that was old and nasty, like they would switch out old nasty sheets with fresh sheets. Old nasty bandages with fresh bandages. And the doctors started to notice that the cleaner hospitals you had, the more people survived. And, this is where those ideas get going. And the most famous of these nurses is Clara Barton. She's going to start the U.S. Red Cross after the war is over. One of the most messed up situations you have is with prisoners of war, which is why I gave you a warm-up assignment about that the week before the break. Prisoners of war are usually treated well. Are there any guesses as to why that would be?
Is it against the law to do something to them?
That's starting to be a thing, but that wasn't really a thing until after this war. There's a more practical reason. Can you guys see my fist that I have holding up?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So these are 5 Northern soldiers. These are 5 Confederate soldiers. All right. Both of these groups have been taken prisoner. The Northern soldiers, the Confederate soldiers are both held as prisoner in each other's camps on the other side. If you treat these 5 guys badly and word gets out, what's going to happen to your guys over on this side?
They're going to get treated badly.
The same.
Exactly. So if you treat these guys well, your hope is what will happen to your guys over here?
They'll be treated good.
Exactly. So that's why most of the time you would treat prisoners well. But that situation changed about halfway through the war because of the Emancipation Proclamation. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation did what that changed the war a lot?
Freed slaves in the North.
Correct. Well, it freed slaves in the South, so they would come to the North. So that made the South really mad because you're messing with their economy and the way that they prosecute the war. And so the South said, well, you know what? If you're going to free the slaves, if we capture African Americans in blue suits, we ain't giving them up for nothing. And so the North said, well, if you're going to be like that, we're not going to give you back any Southern prisoners. And so the South said, oh, well, if you're going to be like that, we ain't going to give you back any of your prisoners. And so now, because what usually happened is these 5 guys on each side, you would say, well, we got a general, a major, a lieutenant, a sergeant, and a private. You got a general, a major, a lieutenant, a sergeant, a private. We'll switch them out because that's an even swap. Or like if you got one general, we'll trade you 5 lieutenants for the general. Now they're not doing any of that. They say, hey, we're going to hold on to everybody for the rest of the war. The problem with that is that the South, remember, doesn't have a lot of food. They have a hard time feeding their own soldiers. So are they going to have an easy or a hard time feeding prisoners that are their enemy? That is a question. Somebody, anybody. Somebody answer the question, please.
What was the question?
The question is it going to be easy or difficult for the Confederates to feed thousands and thousands of Union prisoners of war, considering they can't feed their own soldiers?
Difficult.
Very difficult. So what I'm going to show you are some pictures of some of these prisoners. They're a little bit disturbing. So let me kind of just show them to you. You guys can probably see these. So you can see how skinny they are when the war is over, because they didn't feed the prisoners well. One of the warm-ups showed you these tents and the fact that they had to get water from a swamp that they had to go to the bathroom in. And so you had a lot of people getting sick and dying. Anytime somebody would complain about the fact that they had dirty water, very little food, bad shelter in times of, cold or storms, they would get beaten. So this situation at Andersonville was really horrific. And the commander of Andersonville camp was hung after the war. So, it kind of shows you how bad some of these soldiers had it. Questions at the moment?
No.
So we'll go through the last set of the notes and we'll be all set. The turning points of the Civil War are the last part for today. Does anybody remember why a turning point is important to remember in any war that anybody studies? Y'all can guess.
What was the question?
Why is a turning point important in any war?
It might give the losing side a chance to win.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So it's like when everything switches over, one side's winning the war, and now it all flips around so the other side's winning. Up until this point, which side was doing way better than anybody thought they would?
South.
Yes, the South was doing very good. And so the turning points are going to flip this around. In the West, you have the Battle of Vicksburg, which was your warm-up for today that only a couple of you have done so far. Let me show you why Vicksburg is a big deal. Just give me a second and I can get to that. There we go. Somebody must have made this not too long ago, because in other semesters, this map wouldn't show up on a search, but now it does. But here's the map. Do you guys see this map okay?
Yeah.
All right. Anything in this map that is in dark green was controlled by the Confederates in 63. So we're talking the third year of the war. Anything in light green was controlled by the Union, and these white patches over here are lands controlled by Native Americans still. What you see is this green line kind of running through the South. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what the whole point of Vicksburg was. Vicksburg is about where I'm pointing my little pointer at right here. And it was the last place on the Mississippi River that the North was able to take. When Vicksburg falls, this whole area is cut off from this area. And that's a big deal because this area on the East Coast has all of the soldiers, all of the generals. This is where your population is at. And so you got to try to keep that. But you got to feed it, right? And so the question is, how are you going to feed it? Well, they're being blocked off from importing food that way. And so what the South was trying to do was grow most of its food out here and then transport it by a wagon and a railroad to the east. The problem is when the Mississippi River falls, can you keep getting this food out to the east? Question mark. Yes, no.
No.
No. And Vicksburg is the key to that. So Ulysses Grant, that guy I showed you earlier where Lincoln says, hey, this guy fights, I like him. He's the guy who was able to cut the Confederates in half at Vicksburg. Grant, tries to blow his way in by shooting them up. It doesn't work. So he surrounds them with what is called a siege. And it's important to know what a siege is. It was one of the questions in the warm-up so far. I haven't had anyone be able to answer it. But let's say that, well, let me try to draw it. That might work a little better because this is, All right. Can you guys see this okay?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to have this
Yeah.
represent Vicksburg. All right. And Vicksburg, you got all these, I think it was 10 or 20,000 Confederate soldiers there. What do they need to keep fighting?
Soldiers.
Okay. You need soldiers to replace the ones who get hurt or killed. What else do you need?
Food.
Yep. You need food. What else? You're shooting bullets all day, every day. What else are you going to need? I just laid it on a teacher. Ammunition, all the medical supplies, all of those things need to be coming in all the time or you're sunk. What a siege is this. Just bear with me here. All right. A siege is when instead of coming in and attacking, you come close and then you start to go around and go in a big circle all the way around your target. And so by the time you have surrounded the target, like Vicksburg, is Vicksburg going to be able to get any more soldiers, food, ammunition, or anything else?
No.
Say that again, Trevor.
No.
Right. And so what's going to happen pretty soon once Vicksburg is surrounded?
They're gonna get taken over.
That's a question. Correct. Because they're going to be so weak, they're not going to be able to survive. They're going to run out of food. They're going to run out of bullets. They're going to run out of men who are strong enough to fight. And Grant is going to take Vicksburg over. That's what a siege is. And it worked for Grant in Vicksburg, so Grant later on in the war is going to use it again. So don't forget a siege, no matter what happens today. The two big things you need to remember today is the Emancipation Proclamation and what a siege is and why that's important to warfare. So Grant wins out in the west in Vicksburg, but on the other side in the east, Lincoln has his hands full because Lee is just tearing everybody up. Lee beats the guy who replaced McClellan, a dude by the name of General Burnside. I'm going to show you what Burnside looks like real quick because he's pretty memorable just by the way he looks. There we go. That's Burnside. Looks like he had a sneeze go out of control or something, right? He's got like the biggest facial hair by his nose and his ears that anybody's ever seen. They're so big and so memorable. Does anyone know what you call that kind of hair on your face?
No.
Called sideburns. Elvis had some big sideburns, but not as big as this guy. So like everybody's like, oh yeah, sideburns, Burnside. So they just kind of screwed up the name and called any kind of hair down by your ears as sideburns. And it's weird. This dude's got more hair on his face than he's got on his head. You know, maybe he should have shaved it and taped it up there. I don't know. But Burnside, Lee beats the crap out of him at Fredericksburg. So Lincoln fires Burnside, replaces him with a guy called General Hooker. Hooker lost. Lee then invades the North a second time, and he invades all the way up into Pennsylvania. He goes through Maryland. He's into Pennsylvania now, and Lincoln is starting to freak out again, and he's like, hey, we got to stop this guy. Who's going to stop him? I know. And he sends this guy, General Meade, to stop him. He's got one job. General Meade has to find Lee in Pennsylvania because they don't know where he is. They just know he's running around up there somewhere. By the time they hear Lee has tore up Town X, they get to Town X and he's gone. And, you know, all the telegraph lines are cut. They can't, you know, communicate. They're just running around Pennsylvania trying to get lucky and find Lee and tangle up with him and stop him. And that is going to happen in tomorrow's notes, which hopefully some of you all read so we can talk about next Monday. And I'll give you a little spoiler alert. That is the battle known as Gettysburg. That is going to be the other turning point battle. So you got two of them. You got Vicksburg in the west. You got Gettysburg in the east. All right. Questions about anything I've gone over today?
No.
Anybody else? I'll take that as a no. Does anybody have any questions about anything at all? Doing work, keeping up with assignments, grades?
No.
No? All right. So if nobody's got anything and nobody is saying anything, I'm going to head out in a minute. Just a quick reminder, we'll meet again as a class, 9 o'clock next Monday morning. as well as 1 o'clock next Monday afternoon. If you have individual questions that you want to ask about, you can email me anytime. I'll also have video office hours at 3 o'clock tomorrow and 3 o'clock Thursday. And if just keep up with the assignments, like I said, and that's pretty much all I've got. All right. Thank you, guys. Y'all have a good week.